Hello and welcome. Today we're going to be doing a video on the oil pan replacement on the Evo 10. Similar procedure applies to the Ralliart, and it's actually extremely similar on the base Lancers as well, 2008 and up. So this is a 2010 Mitsubishi Evolution GSR. We're going to be changing the oil pan on this engine. It's leaking, it's rusty, and it's time to put a new one on. Well, we're putting a good used one on. Usually I like to go for brand new, but sometimes you get really clean used ones. So that's what we're going to work on today. So the first thing you want to do is you want to work safely. You want to get your car up on stands with a jack. Make sure it's safe. Make sure it can't fall on you. In this case, I'm using a 2-post lift. It's as high as it goes. And if I was doing this on my back, which you definitely can, make sure you use jack stands, please. So the first thing you got to do, if you still have the plastic under tray, is you want to remove it. Now, through the magic of video, I've already removed pretty much every single clip minus the center one. So I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to see what we're working with here. So let's take this out. There goes the tray. Just like that. All right, so this is our oil pan. It appears to be leaking all over the place. Around the perimeter, in this corner here, it's pretty rusty, it's pretty crusty, and it's seen better days. All right, so once you removed the big main under tray, if you still have it, a lot of Evos don't, they kind of get lost, they get beat up, especially if they're lowered, they get trashed. The next thing you want to do is you want to remove this side piece as well. So you have 3 more clips holding it in, this whole piece comes out, and then you have good access to the actual oil pan, because we need to be able to access the bolts on this side easily and swiftly. So we'll go ahead and remove that, and I'll show you how to remove the oil pan. Okay, so now that we have the splash shield out of the way as well, the side one, that's all we need in order to remove splash shields. Nothing left to do. We can go ahead and drain the oil. I actually put the car lower to the ground because I don't have one of those fancy tall oil drains. So I have to use this little pan. So I put the car as low as it goes on the hoist so that way it doesn't make a giant mess. So I'm essentially working on my back now. So we're going to use a 17mm wrench or ratchet, whatever you want. Crack open the drain bolt. Let me get a little bit closer here. And we're going to drain the oil. The key to this is to drain the oil nice and long because we're going to have a lot of oil accumulating inside the oil pan regardless. This drain plug looks like it's seen better days. It's past life. Let's see how good I am. Not bad. So let that drain nice and long. The more you drain out, the less you're going to end up wearing on your face and skin when you pull this oil pan off. So the oil pan removal itself is pretty basic, pretty straightforward. You need very basic tools. The 17mm to drain the oil, like I just said. And basically you need a 10mm socket and a 12mm socket. There's not much to it. Most of it is easy to access, unlike the old Evos or, you know, like my DSM there where we have the downpipe running, you know, front to back. So you have to remove the downpipe, you have to remove the transfer case, all that stuff. On the Evo 10, it's pretty easy. Same thing on the Ralliart, and even more so on the base Lancer. So a bunch of 10mm bolts and 12s, and we'll pull this thing apart. So I'm going to let it drain. Once it's done draining, I'll pick up the video and show you what you have to remove to get it off. All right, and we're back. So we have the oil draining, car back up in the air. So we're going to go through some of the tools. I probably should have done this at the beginning, but we'll go through it now because it's not too bad. Like I said, you don't need very much to do this. You need a 17 for the drain plug. Okay, you're going to need a ratchet. I use a 3/8 with an extension, a 10mm, a 12mm socket. Shallow is good. You can use deep ones as well, but shallow's nice and easy. And then you're going to need a 12mm wrench. Ratcheting wrench is your best friend. If you don't have a ratcheting wrench, a normal wrench works as well. It just takes a little bit longer. So the first step we're going to do, now that the oil is draining, I actually forgot to mention earlier, if you want to change the oil filter, now's the time to do it. I mean, if your oil is brand new, you probably don't need to change the filter, but if it's got some miles on it or kilometers on it, you can go ahead and replace the filter now, so that way when it comes time to fill it back up, it's good to go. So now we have to remove this bracket. This bracket is going to be the same throughout the years, regardless of what AC compressor you use. This bracket remains the same. So there's a 12 mil bolt that holds, in this case, it holds the AC compressor. It's a long bolt that holds the compressor to the bracket. And I believe on the on the newer styles that have the smaller compressor, you're going to have an additional bracket that bolts to this that the compressor then bolts to. It's like a multi-bracket system. It's almost like Mitsubishi changed the compressor but didn't want to change some of this stuff, so they just made a makeshift bracket to kind of accommodate the new compressor to the bracket. Regardless, it'll be a smaller bolt that you have to remove, I believe. It'll be in the exact same location. So you can remove this piece of plastic if you want, but if you have a ratcheting wrench, you can just slide your hand in through here. You can see the bolt head here. Just crack it. There we go. So we're gonna get this bolt out. As you can see, it's spinning. If your car has high mileage and a lot of corrosion, you're gonna want to spray the back of this and all around with some PB Blaster or penetrating fluid, because sometimes it does corrode itself to the bracket, and the bolt being so long, it just stretches and snaps. So I got it broken already. And get it off by hand. It doesn't have to come all the way out. It just needs to come off enough that it's out of the threads of this bracket so we can remove the bracket next. Let me use my other hand here. All right, so I got slack in it now. We're good to go. So the next step is we're going to take the 12 millimeter socket and extension. We're going to get this 12 millimeter bolt out. There's going to be another one right in here and one more right here. Once that is done, that bracket is ready to come off. Now, a lot of you guys, if you have an Evo 10, they're going to be looking at it and be like, hey, wait a second. I have some lines running through here. What's that about? So this car had the engine replaced. His engine blew and the oil cooler was full of metal shavings. So right now the car does not have an oil cooler. It's got the factory block-offs on the sending unit there. He's looking for another OEM oil cooler in good condition that's not full of metal shavings, in which case it'll be replaced. So normally you would have lines, 2 metal lines running here with the bracket held in by this 10 mil bolt. If you do have that, all you have to do is remove this 10 millimeter bolt. The lines could be intact, and then you could just, once this bracket's loose, you can just wiggle the bracket out of the way. The lines do not get in the way of the oil pan, so you don't have to go any further with the lines. All you have to do is remove that bracket and you're good to go. So in this case, this is just like what a Ralliart would be essentially without the lines, but the process is the exact same. So I'm gonna go ahead and remove those, then I'll show you what I have to remove for the oil pan. As you can see, the bracket is removed. The 3 bolts are out, which exposes a few more bolts. So it exposes this 10 millimeter and this 12. The bracket sat right in this corner. You can see I still left the bolt into the compressor. Nice and easy, doesn't need to go anywhere. So now the next thing we're going to do is we're going to work on removing the oil pan parameter bolts. A lot of them are going to be 10 millimeters. You are going to have 4 12s, 2 in the front, 2 in the back. So there's one of them right by the AC compressor and the other one. So there's a reference of where it is. And if you go along the back of the engine by the transfer case, you're going to have 2 more. One right here and one right here. Now, if you were removing the oil pan and intending to keep it, there is a proper sequence in which you want to undo the bolts. That way you're not stressing the metal, you're not, potentially bending the sheet metal on the oil pan. So you want to go from an outward pattern in. But in this case, since we're replacing the oil pan, because that one's seen better days, I don't care. I'm just going to blast this thing off and not worry about it too much. One thing to note, the 12 millimeter bolts here and in the front over there, they're long bolts. You can probably see through here. They go all the way through the lower girdle and into the main part of the block. So they're about this long. They are going to be torqued a lot more than these little ones. So you're going to need to use a little bit of muscle to get those out. Like I said, you can do everything by hand. I do have a little impact gun that I'm going to use just to speed the process up. I'll probably do this live. I'm going to let this drain as it already is. I'm just going to work around the, the mess and zip this thing off. Now, there's so much RTV from the factory that even once you remove the bolts, that oil pan's not going anywhere. So you don't have to worry about it falling on you. So let's get to it. See if I can set this down somewhere where you guys can see. There we go. So I'm going to start off with those 12s and then work my way to the 10s. Now they're the same length front to back, so if you mix them up, it's okay. And then the 10 mil bolts are all the same length as well. So it doesn't matter if you mix them up, just don't lose them. This is different than the 4G63 engines, which had different length bolts depending on the bolt location. So a lot of guys would do these jobs improperly and put the long bolts where the short bolts would have went and end up digging grooves into their timing belt and causing engine failure. So thankfully Mitsubishi simplified this for us. Nothing to worry about in this case. So there's the 412s. I'm going to change my 12 mil to a 10 mil and blast the rest of them off. Again, in no particular order. If you were using this pan, it would matter. In this case, it doesn't. And that's the last one. Just like that. I'll take them all out of my pocket, set them on the chair so we don't lose them. And there we have it. 4 12s, a bunch of 10s, the impact that I use, and what I use for phone stand, the useless box. All it does is turn itself off once you turn it on. Anyway, you see the parameter of the oil pan has no bolts left in it. We took them all out. But like I said, there's so much RTV that it's still solid. It's not going anywhere. So what I'm going to do now, since it's still draining a fair bit, I'm going to let it drain a little bit longer. I'm going to go inside, have lunch. And once I come back, we're going to put the drain plug back on so it's less of a mess once it falls off. And we're going to pry the oil pan off the parameter, pull it off the engine. And then I'll show you how to clean everything up and get the bottom of the engine prepared for the new seal and get the new oil pan, if it's used, prepared for the new seal. If it's new, there's not much you need to do. And we'll go from there. As promised, I am back from lunch. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to screw the drain plug back in. Obviously, oil will continue to drain for weeks if I left it out. One drip at a time. So this way, when we're working underneath it, and when the oil pan inevitably tilts, we're not going to wear some of that oil. Because even though we drain all the oil and let it sit for a couple hours, there's probably still a 1/4 inch of oil on the bottom of this pan that can't drain. And I'll show you that afterwards. So we want that on. So when we start prying this oil pan off, if it spills over, tilts this way, you know, we're not getting another 1/2 quart on the floor. So I'm going to set the phone down now. What I like to use for this is either some sort of chisel, small chisel, or screwdriver, combination of both. Having a hammer with the chisel helps. And once again, if you do plan to reuse this oil pan, you have to be a little more careful when you pry it out. You don't want to deform the thin sheet metal too much. But once again, I'm not using this oil pan, so I could care less. The factory does provide you with a prying section right here in the corner, which always gets in the way by the control arm, wheel, whatever else you have in the way. They also give you another spot to pry over here somewhere, just by the oil filter. But then you have a bunch of other crap in the way there as well. So there's no real easy way to pry this. Other times I've come in here, I've gotten a bar in through here. There's not an actual pry spot, but you can sometimes wedge things in there. Once again, the transfer case gets in the way, so there's no super duper easy way to pry this off. You just have to go in there and kind of do it and do your best not to bash your knuckles. But I'm gonna set the phone down. I'm gonna try to get in there and get that oil pan off, and I'll show you what's inside. Let's see if I can set this down somewhere. Once again. Really should invest in a stand or something of that sort. Okay. It should be okay. Let's see. Get some gloves on because it's pretty dirty. All that residual oil. There she is. So be careful because some oil will still drip out of the engine, as you can see. Remember how I told you to keep the drain plug on? Well, look how much oil is still left in the bottom of this thing. Still a fair bit. Well, there we have it. The oil pan is off. So now if you're putting a brand new oil pan on, you don't have to worry about cleaning the old oil pan too much. You have to make sure the edges are straight. But now what we have to do is we have to prepare the surface. So there's a lot of gasket material still left over here. All over the place, all around the perimeter. So you have to use a razor blade. We have to use various tools, scrubbies, brushes, to gently clean this residual stuff off without actually damaging the surface. We don't want to gouge the block. We don't want to have any other issues with it. It looks like this has been resealed at some point. I think it has revised timing chain done. Somebody did it on this engine at some point, so this front case would have been resealed. And maybe they did the oil pan too. Almost doesn't look like the factory sealant on it, just the way it's bulged over, but I could be wrong. But yeah, what I generally like to use for this stuff, this works really well. Again, I'm not sponsored by anybody, but I find this stuff works well. You just have to make sure you don't get it in your eyes or on your skin because it's extremely corrosive. One of these razor blades works well. You have to be careful not to cut yourself, of course. If you have power tools, this guy works extremely well. It's plastic, so it cleans up the surface really well without gouging it. It's not a, it's not a sanding disc or grinding disc. It's meant just to remove glue, essentially. So, combination of those, a little wire brush, whatever you have. This guy here works well to get into the nice tight corners. Basically just a bunch of muscle work to get the entire parameter all the way around cleaned of any residue. And you have to be as careful as you can not to get it in the engine. Obviously gravity will want to pull it down, but some of it will want to fling and stick to the engine. So if that's the case, you just want to make sure you wipe everything down, clean everything well, so you have a clean surface, so you're not introducing debris inside your engine once you seal it back up. So I'm going to work on cleaning this, and I'll show you what it looks like once it's done and once the new oil pan's ready to go on. All right, and we're back. So the entire surface is cleaned all the way around and degreased. As you can see, all the debris that could potentially have sprayed or ended up getting on the engine, like I said before, I wiped off. And I got the oil pan ready as well. Like I mentioned before, the oil pan is used, but I treated this the same way as the block. You see it's nice and clean all the way around. Okay, you also want to degrease that. So once you clean all the old RTV off and get a nice shiny surface, degrease it. Now, if you get a new oil pan, it's obviously going to be painted. In cleaning so, I removed some of the factory paint off the parameter of it. Just because the oil pan is new from Mitsubishi in the Mitsubishi packaging, do not assume it's not warped. Put it on a flat ground, flat concrete, whatever you have that's flat and you know it's relatively flat, and make sure all the edges aren't bent. I've seen many cases and I've done many new oil pans where the oil pan will get dropped during shipping, and either this corner or this corner or this corner or any corner will be up on an angle like this. You are going to have a leak. RTV can only cover so much. So if you're putting a brand new oil pan on, I should say, make sure it's true, make sure it's flat. Let the oil pan do the sealing part with the sealer instead of you trying to make up for a bent edge, you know, caking on sealer and then having a bunch of leaks. So just make sure the oil pan is true, make sure it is as flat as it can be for, you know, a piece of metal, and make sure it's clean. And if you work clean and you work smart, you should have no issues. So once again, cleaned all the way around, degreased, and same with the engine. Now here's a pro tip if you're going to do this and not let it sit for too long before sealing it. Obviously there's no oil on here right now, but oil is still making its way down from the head, from the side of the block, from everywhere. It is going to make its way down. So right before you seal this up, make sure you wipe, put some rags in here. Don't leave the rags, but wipe in here. And all these galleries, all these little nooks and crannies, wipe them all. Because what happens is as the oil makes its way down, depending on the RTV you're using, it might interfere with the sealer. Before the sealer gets a chance to cure, you might have a bead of oil coming down and affecting the seal in this area as it comes down. So right before you put the pan on, wipe everything down as far as up as you can go. Make sure you don't leave any rags in there, of course, do it quickly. And then re-degrease this edge where the sealer is going to sit. So that way you buy yourself as much time as you possibly can. So the next step for me is I'm going to put RTV around the oil pan. I'm probably not going to take a video of this because RTV has a certain amount of time that you have to get it done in. But what I'll probably do is I'll probably snap a quick picture and attach it to this video so you can see how it's done. You don't want to put on too much, but not too little. If you put on too much, it seeps out, and it seeps out into the engine as well, and then it could break off and clog your oil pickup, which would be for bad times later once it can't suck enough oil to float the bearings, you end up destroying the engine. So it's very important to put enough, but not too much. So I'll show you what that looks like, and then we're going to button this up, and I'll show you how it goes back together and finish up the job. Alright guys, so now that we have the goop, the RTV all over the oil pan, I'm going to do a quick wipe down of this mating surface once again for any residual oil that may have dripped. We don't want any oil being introduced to the RTV while it's curing, so we want to have it as clean as possible. Okay, good little wipe. Have a few bolts in my pockets. I have a few of the, I have all four of the big long 12 mils and a few of the 10 mils. So there's the oil pan. So now you just have to carefully lift it up into location, into position I should say, and then get the bolt started. Always try to be super careful not to move it around too much. I like to use the long bolts almost as like locating pins, since they are so long, to make sure we're going in the right way. I'll start one on this side, and the other over on this side. Now at this point you're going to want to use the RTV manufacturer's instructions on curing and tightening and whatnot. I personally like to use a product called the Right Stuff. I believe it's made by Permatex. And generally the way they want it done is they want you to apply it to the oil pan like you would normally. I've attached a picture of that already. And then you're supposed to get the oil pan on, or whatever part you're using. In this case it's the oil pan. supposed to get it on, get the bolts in, and keep it finger tight. So basically, just tight enough that it makes contact with the bottom of the engine, but we're not torquing it yet. So we're gonna get this on here. We're gonna let it sit for about 60 minutes, about an hour. And then once it's hardened up a little bit, then you torque it to spec. So I will attach the torque specifications as well. But those are the instructions we're going to follow. So I've done that successfully for years. I've been using this stuff. And it's been great. It's always worked. Never have leaks, never have issues. So this job's going to be no different. We're going to follow the same steps and have a leak-free oil pan. Okay, so I have the oil pan hung up where it needs to be. I'm gonna cut the video short because there's no point you guys watching me, screw these in by hand for the next 10 minutes. But I'm gonna go ahead and put the rest of the 10mm bolts that I have. I'm gonna put them in, and I'm gonna let it sit for an hour. Then I'm gonna torque it all and come back on here and show you guys how to button it up. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, so there it is, all finished up. I have all the bolts torqued. So after about an hour, 60-65 minutes, as per Permatex's instructions for the Right Stuff RTV that I used, I went ahead and torqued everything to spec. Went from the inside out on both sides, all the way around. It is important to use a torque wrench if you have one. Please use it. It's simple enough, and you don't want to risk snapping any of the steel bolts in the aluminum casings. It's not a good time. And it's easy enough to do. So I have a 3/8. 3/8. Mine goes up in inch pounds, and the factory specs will give you inch pounds as well as foot pounds. So for the 10mm bolts that go most of the way around, the spec is 90 inch pounds, which is 7.5 foot pounds. For the the 4 long 12mm that go in through the block, the torque specs for that is 22 foot pounds, which is 265 inch pounds. And then for the remaining 3 bolts for the AC compressor bracket, as well as that big long bolt that holds the compressor to the bracket, the torque spec is 17 foot pounds, which is 205 inch pounds. So for this bracket here, so that's that bolt, that bolt, that bolt, as well as that long one. As always, if you're putting a new oil pan or a used one, don't forget to check the torque on the drain plug. Last thing you want to do is this job, put oil in it driving down the street, and have this come out on you because somewhere somebody forgot to torque it. So just give that a friendly check. So now that that's done, what we have to do is let it sit for some time for the RTV to fully cure before we put oil in it. For me, it's an additional 30 minutes, but honestly, it's later in the evening now. So what I like to do, just to be sure if the car doesn't have to go anywhere in a rush, I like to always let it sit overnight, just for my mental well-being. I'll let it sit overnight, and then I'll put oil in it tomorrow morning, fire it up, check for leaks, etc. So I'm going to leave this as is. I have to clean the under tray plastics for him because he had an oil leak, obviously, so they're quite mucky. I have to put that piece of the splash shield on the belt side, and then the under tray. And once that's done, we've already changed our filter. This thing's ready to be put back on the ground, and like I said, filled with oil once it's ready. Start it up, check for leaks. I mean, it's a good idea to have the under tray off to check for leaks. I'm pretty confident it won't leak. I usually don't have issues when I follow these steps. And yeah, that's pretty much it. So I will do an update tomorrow with the car running and everything good. And the meat and potatoes is done. We're almost at the end. Here we go, guys. Hope you can hear me. Remember to fill it up with oil. Once you fill it up with oil, fire it up. Let it run for a little bit. Then we're gonna go back underneath it and make sure there's no leaks. Now, oil can take a lot longer to leak out, but you wanna make sure there's absolutely no obvious leaks, nothing major. Make sure you did the job right. And then keep checking up on it periodically for a few weeks. And if it's dry and good, then you're dry and good. Job well done. Okay, now that it's ran for some time, we can take a look and see if we have any leaks. You can always use a clean rag. Do a gentle wipe around, don't burn yourself if the engine's hot. And see if there's anything obvious and fresh. Obviously there's going to be some residual, you know, the gunk that's stuck to the block, but let's see if there's any fresh oil anywhere. As far as I can go, nope, we are clean and clear. So like I said, keep an eye on this over the next week or two. Make sure nothing develops, and if you're good then you're going to be good for a long time coming. So all that's left now that we are satisfied with this is we are going to put the under tray back on. I currently have this one's outside drying because like I said, I washed it. It was really greasy. So once that's dry, I'm going to be putting that one on first, the little side cover for the belts, then the big under tray on. I'm going to put the car back on the ground, check the oil level one more time to make sure it's good, nice and full, and we are done and we are set to go. So thanks for watching. Catch you guys in the next one.